Just some basics before we get started. What were our objectives today is to understand the importance of strengthening a reliable safety culture here at Valley View. Learn about reliability science and the experience of other industries. Learn and practice our tools for high reliability, our error prevention tools, and demonstrate our personal commitment as Valley View team members in holding ourselves and others accountable to our safety expectations. So, if at any time you need to step out, feel free. I know there's some restrooms down the hall to the left. We'll have a break about halfway through, a 10-minute break. And like I said, we'll be out of here, I expect, around 3:45. We're getting near the end of this training. I think we've trained well over 1,000 people. In fact, the core leadership group did this training plus 6 other hours, so they did 9 hours. And you can see that the training has involved anybody that works at Valley View in any capacity. So let's get started. Now, for many of you, you may be familiar with some of this data. In 1999, the Institute of Medicine put out a study that estimated between 44 and 98,000 patient deaths per year occur due to medical errors. This is the equivalent of a 747 crashing and killing the entire plane full of passengers on a daily basis. So I want you to imagine for a second that tomorrow you open the Post-Independent, and on page 1 they have a story about the bridge, because every day they have a story about the bridge. Page 2 is a story on the high school basketball team. And then on page 3, buried somewhere at the bottom, is another 747 crashes in Denver, kills everybody on board. And imagine that tomorrow you're also flying. This is what is happening in healthcare. On average, 1 in 382 admissions to a hospital dies from a medical error. That's the equivalent of a death every 5 minutes and 22 seconds. And so by the time we finish this lecture today, 45 people will have died from medical errors. In fact, it is estimated to be the 5th leading cause of death in the United States. And this study was in 1999. In 2013, we really haven't gotten much better. Another study using slightly different inclusion criteria to review records. The first was more of a passive review. The second was an active review looking for unusual events that may have led to death, like a patient who's suddenly transferred from acute care emergently to the ICU. And their estimates were between 210 and 440,000 patients each year suffer from preventable harm that contributes to their death.
So for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Ellen Brooks, as David said, and I'm also a pediatrician and have been here for 15 years at Valley View. And I'm excited to be part of this project and to be presenting to you today because I know I've made my fair share of errors. And it scares me to death to think that one of my errors could result in a patient's serious harm or death. And I really think that the tools that we're going to talk about today, I think there's very good evidence that if we incorporate these, that we can really decrease the likelihood of making a serious medical error. And I want those that practice around me and that work with me to help me not to make one of those errors. So we're going to start with a story about Josie King, who was an 18-month-old who basically died of a third world disease, dehydration, in arguably one of the best children's hospitals in the United States, Johns Hopkins.
Josie was 18 months old. She had brown eyes and light brown hair. She loved to dance and had just learned to bounce on the trampoline with her older siblings, Jack, Relly, and Eva. She had just learned to say, "I love you." In January of 2001, Josie was admitted to Johns Hopkins after suffering first and second-degree burns from climbing into a hot bath. She healed well and within weeks was scheduled for release. 2 days before she was to return home, she died of severe dehydration and misused narcotics. I would like to take you through the events that resulted in this needless tragedy. Josie spent 10 days in the PICU. I was by her side every day and night. I paid attention to every minute detail of the doctors' and nurses' care, and I was quick to ask questions. I bonded with them and was in constant awe of the medical attention she received. Every time Josie moved or fussed, someone would be quick to push her pain button. I tried rubbing her head and found that often this would settle her. Much to our relief, Josie was experiencing a quick recovery. Her burns were healing beautifully. She was sent down to the intermediate care floor with expectations of being sent home in a few days. Her 3 older siblings prepared for her welcome home celebration. We were told that no one had ever been sent back up to the PICU. The following week, her central line had been taken out. I began noticing that every time she saw a drink, she would scream for it, and I thought this was strange. I was told not to let her drink. While a nurse and I gave her a bath, she sucked furiously on a washcloth. As I put her to bed, I noticed that her eyes were rolling back in her head. Although I asked the nurse to call the doctor, she reassured me that oftentimes children did this and her vitals were fine. I told her Josie had never done this, and perhaps another nurse could look at her. After yet another reassurance from another nurse that everything was fine, I was told that it was okay for me to sleep at home. I called to check in 2 times during the night and returned to the hospital at 5:30 in the morning. I took one look at Josie and demanded that a doctor come at once. She was not fine. Josie's medical team arrived and administered 2 shots of Narcan. I asked if she could have something to drink. The request was approved, and Josie gulped down nearly a liter of juice. Verbal orders were issued for there to be no narcotics given. As I sat with Josie, I noticed that the nurse on morning duty was acting very strangely. She seemed nervous, overly demonstrative, and in a hurry. Uneasy, I asked the other nurses about her, and they said she had been a nurse for a long time. Still worried, I expressed my concern to one of the doctors, and he agreed that she was acting a bit odd. Meanwhile, Josie started perking up. She was more alert and had kept all the liquids down. I was still scared and asked her doctors to please stay close by. At 1 o'clock, the nurse walked over with a syringe of methadone. Alarmed, I told her there had been an order for no narcotics. She said the orders had been changed and administered the drug. Josie's heart stopped as I was rubbing her feet. Her eyes were fixed and I screamed for help. I stood helpless as a crowd of doctors and nurses came running into her room. I was ushered into a small room with a chaplain. The next time I saw Josie, she had been moved back up to the PICU. Doctors and nurses were standing around her bed. No one seemed to want to look at me. She was hooked up to many machines, and her leg was black and blue. I looked into their faces and said to them, "You did this to her, now you must fix her." I was told to pray. 2 days later, Jack, Relly, and Eva were brought to the hospital to kiss their beloved Josie goodbye. Josie was taken off of life support. She died in our arms on a snowy night in what's considered to be one of the best hospitals in the world. Our lives were shattered and changed forever. Josie died from severe dehydration and misused narcotics. Careless human errors. On top of our overwhelming sorrow and intense grief, we were consumed by anger. They say anger can do one of 2 things to you. It can cause you to rot away, or it can propel you forward. There were days when all I wanted was to destroy the hospital and then put an end to my own pain. My 3 remaining children were my only reason for getting out of bed and functioning. One day, I will tell them how they saved my life. Tony and I decided that we had to let the anger move us forward. We would do something good that would help prevent this from ever happening to a child again.
There's not a hospital in the United States, or in the world for that matter, that has not experienced something just like this. But this is not just a hospital problem, it's also a clinic problem. We actually see 25 times more people in the clinic setting, the ambulatory setting, than we do in the hospital. So we have that many more opportunities to make an error that can cause serious harm. The types of errors that we see in the ambulatory sites are similar to what we see in the hospital: medication errors, diagnostic errors, lab errors, clinical knowledge errors, communication errors, and administrative errors. But it's not just a clinical problem. Here's some examples of people that are not clinical that work in healthcare that are responsible for some serious harm that was done in their settings. The first one, an Indiana building service worker replaces a broken shower curtain rod on a behavioral health unit. The first rod broke as it was supposed to during a suicide attempt. The replacement rod was not the approved breakaway type, and the second attempt was successful. A Florida buyer reintroduces an inflatable mattress pad. The pad had been removed from the hospital following a patient death from restraint entanglement. The pad raises the patient position to near the top of the bed rails. A second patient is found entangled and not breathing. Dietary: improperly stored chicken salad caused 3 patient deaths at a Louisiana hospital, sickened 42 others, and 12 staff became sick as well. And even volunteers. At a Texas hospital, volunteers saw a new mom and dad in need of help. They assisted the new parents to the front door, pushing the wheelchair for the dad. The couple had just snatched a baby from the birthing room. But it's not just our non-clinical workers either. It can be even contract workers. So in the Duke University Hospital System in 2004, they contracted with some people to do some elevator maintenance. And they needed to drain the hydraulic fluid from their elevators. They didn't bring containers to put it in. So someone very nicely said, well, here's some empty containers. Those containers happen to be containers that used to hold sterilizing fluid for part of the process of sterilizing surgical instruments. The labels were not changed. They drained the fluid that looked very similar to the surgical sterilizing fluid, and then left the barrels there. Somebody found these barrels, thought, this is odd, let's send them back to our distribution center. Those then got into circulation through several hospitals in their university hospital system, and were put into actual circulation. People started in the OR sensing that the instruments were more slippery than usual and started talking, and finally somebody looked into it. At that point, 3,800 patients had been affected by this series of errors.
So as we move from talking about things that occur nationally to things that occur here at Valley View, we need to develop some common language on how we will classify these events. And preventable harm comes in 3 basic categories: serious safety events, precursor safety events, and near-miss safety events. And the cause of all 3 are the same, and that's a deviation from generally accepted performance standards. And what that means is it's beyond the standard of care. Often in medicine we talk about the standard of care. And yes, if you deviate from the standard of care, that is a gap. But it also includes deviation from policies and procedures. Any deviation from what you did do, from what you should have done, is considered a gap. In fact, it's even a gap if our policies and procedures are out of date to national standards. So, all these events require a deviation from generally accepted performance standard or a gap. So a serious safety event is one that reaches the patient and results in moderate to severe harm or death. A precursor safety event is one that reaches the patient and results in minimal harm or no detectable harm. And finally, a near-miss safety event is one that does not reach the patient and the air is caught by a detection barrier or by chance. So, I want to spend a few minutes classifying some events. So, let's say a nurse is putting a patient back into the bed, and the patient is a fall risk, and she puts him into the bed, and she fails to set the bed rails up. He gets out of bed, falls, and breaks a hip. How would we classify that one?
Sounds serious.
Yeah, serious safety event. All right, let's flip through here. How about if a patient is ordered amoxicillin, and in the computer system, you're supposed to put the weights in pounds. I mean, you're supposed to put the weights in kilograms, and they put it in pounds, basically going from a smaller number to a bigger number. The drug is ordered at 2.5 times the dose. The patient receives the dose. The error is noted later, and the patient comes down with diarrhea.
Depends about how severe the diarrhea is, but it's either a precursor or a serious.
Right. Mild diarrhea.
Yeah.
Precursor. Excellent. All right. How about if a patient is ordered Zosam, and the nurse is about to administer it, and she says, "You know what? I took care of Mr. Smith last week. I remember him having a penicillin allergy." She calls the physician at his office. He goes back, he checks his records, and he says, "Oh, yes, you're right. Thank goodness. Don't give him the Zosam, let's change it." What's that one? How about a patient is recommended to have a gallbladder surgery. They're worried about the cost of their surgery. They want to stop by the financial office to get an estimate of the cost. The financial department doesn't spend the time looking at their insurance, how much their deductible is, how much it would cost them. They just roll out the biggest price possible, and they choose not to have the surgery, and they end up septic and dying later. Pretty serious safety event. How about an 11-month-old is admitted to the hospital. He is breastfeeding some. A diet order is ordered for the baby. 2 days later, it's noted that his protein and albumin keep dropping. He's very, very fussy. We ask, how has he been eating? And mom says, they never bring him any food. I only get food. That one's a little harder because you don't know if it was, he was breastfeeding. So he wasn't terrible. Was it minimal harm or serious or moderate harm? All right. Yeah, it could be a precursor or a serious safety event. All right. How about a worker is moving a computer, and he gets in the elevator, and they're doing construction, and they shut off the elevator while he's in there. And an hour and a half later, someone opens the elevator and says, "Oh my goodness, what are you doing in here?" And he was calling for an hour and a half. Probably precursor. You know, I wish I was creative and I was making these up. But unfortunately, I'm not. In fact, that elevator one, on March 7th, 2016, in the New York Times, there was an article from China where the same exact thing happened. And the lady was found a month later, deceased.
The elevator was down for a month.
In China. Here it was down for about an hour and a half. We got saved by chance as well.
There's no call button in the elevator?
So there was 2 elevators that went down, someone else called on the other elevator, and then they thought that it was the other elevator going off, and they didn't know something was the other elevator. How about in the bronchoscope? It's a Friday afternoon, and they just did a bronch on a patient, and they put the scope in the cleaning machine to clean it, but they want to get out of there because it's Friday and they forget to turn it on. On Monday morning, they come in, assuming that it's been cleaned, and open it up, and it turns out the patient on Friday night had tuberculosis. It probably depends on the level of harm that did occur. So this is the classification system that we're currently using. On a piece of paper somewhere, I want everybody to write down the number of occurrence reports or 80/80 calls that you have made in the last 12 months. And it is okay to write 0. Can't remember. Estimate is good enough. And it's okay to write 0. So, who has a number greater than 10? Ellen's supposed to raise her hand. All right, does anybody have a number greater than 5? How about a greater number than 3? Anybody 1 or higher? So for every serious safety event, it is estimated there are hundreds to thousands of precursor events. And for every serious safety event, there are thousands to 10,000s of near misses. So at Valley View, we should be seeing 500 to 5,000 precursor safety events, or 5,000 to 50,000 near miss events. And the issue is, in healthcare, we're so accustomed to a dysfunctional system that we can't even see these events. We would probably be more, Paul Solomon would be more shocked if every patient he saw knew exactly what medications they were on. How many patients know exactly what medications they're on? Who said 0?
Not quite 0.
Not quite 0?
They
Right.
really got the blue pill.
The blue pill. They don't even know what medications they're on. You ever have troubles finding labs or getting results? Or getting the right test that you wanted? A different test is done. Are the orders perfectly clear in radiology?
Not all the time.
On a daily basis? On a daily basis, every order is perfect? You have no problems with the orders?
They're not all perfect.
They're not all perfect.
Have to do some investigating sometimes.
Even in finance, it's perfect. The cards are, the insurance is fine. You know exactly what to expect.
It's like issue.
What's that?
It's like issue.
So we can't even see the events anymore. They're so common. We would have to pinch ourselves and wake up if a day went perfect. So, just in summary, the serious safety events are deviations from the best practice, what we should have done, to causing moderate to severe harm. That equals a serious safety event. Now, a serious safety event is slightly different than a terminology you might be familiar with, which is a sentinel event. People have heard the term sentinel event. That's a Joint Commission term. And in fact, the Joint Commission is probably moving more towards this than the old sentinel event. And I'll give you an example of a difference. The Joint Commission considers any wrong site surgery to be a sentinel event regardless of the outcome. So if a hand surgeon touches the left hand, just touches it, and the surgery is supposed to be on the right, that's technically a sentinel event. In our classification, that would probably be a precursor event. So some examples of serious safety events are wrong site or side surgeries, medication or blood product errors, falls with injuries, we have these happen all the time, hospital-acquired infections, or delayed diagnosis or incorrect diagnosis.